Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is welcome to our weekly Town of Portland podcast. We're here at the Town Tech Educational Partnership Studio at Portland High School. I'm your host, Dave Kuzminski, and this is episode 7. And with us in the studio is our first Selectwoman, Miss Susan Bransfield, and also Mr. Russell Melmed, who is the Chatham Health Director. On the line with us is a special guest, her first appearance on a podcast, Miss Betsy Gara, who is actually the Executive Director for COST, which is the Council of Small Towns, and wears another hat as well as as the Executive Director of CWWA, which is the Connecticut Waterworks Association. So welcome, Betsy. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, David. Happy to be here with you and Susan and the rest of the Portland gang.
Hey, we're glad to have you here. So I'm going to turn it over. Susan, how have you been?
Very well. Thank you.
That's good. Everybody in the studio is socially distancing, and we also have our masks on. So right. If it sounds a little bit muffled, that's why, and so forth. So, Susan, take it away.
Sure. Well, welcome, Betsy and Russ and Bob and Dave. It's good to be here. Some of the things that are happening is we have formed a re-entry committee. We're calling it re-entry in terms of some of the adjustments that we need to make in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And some of the things that we're doing is we're trying to spread the word everywhere about the importance of wearing a face covering, of wearing a mask. And on Wednesday morning of this past week, Christy Carpino, myself, along with Selectman Ralph Zampano and Town Clerk Ryan Curley, we went to Adams Food from 7 in the morning till 8 in the morning and handed out free masks. Christy has been able to acquire masks, and some of our town employees put 2 to a Ziploc bag, and we were able to give them out to several people. And on Saturday, which I believe is the 16th of the month, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it is, yes.
We will be handing out masks in front of the post office. I'm going to start about 10 o'clock in the morning, and first come, first served. I've been contacted by many people by way of Facebook and other social media saying that they can use these masks, and they're very grateful. So I want to thank Christy for working with us on that, and we look forward to seeing folks on Saturday morning. And this is just part of our prevention, and it's very important for us to wear these masks in public, to socially distance, to use our sanitizer, and to make sure that we're washing our hands and just staying in small groups. And I know Russ is going to talk a little bit more about that, and I think the more we get used to and have comfort in wearing the face coverings, the better off we're all going to be. So that's my short report for this week, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our other guests today, Dave.
Great. Thank you, Susan, and point well taken. And I think Russ is going to expound on the mask issue in just a minute. And before we turn it over to Betsy and Russ, we have Mr. Bob Shea, our Fire Chief / Public Works Director, on the line, who's going to give us a brief update on the Aragoni Bridge construction. So what's new on the bridge, Bob?
I think, thanks, Dave. Thanks to everybody that's here today. I figured this would be the best way to do it quickly so we can get into some important information that Russ and Betsy will offer. But just got off the phone with the latest update regarding the progress of the bridge construction, which is moving along. If anybody's been in the area or ventured over the bridge, there's an awful lot of work being completed. With that said, the east approach sidewalk is completely removed. East approach would be the Portland side, and the most, if not all, the bridge decking has been removed. So there's a big gap there, and glare screens have been put up to certainly protect the drivers a little more, to stay focused on the roadway and approaching traffic to make it safer. We haven't had any issues related to getting emergency vehicles on and off the bridge. Traffic is still somewhat limited, so I know that's probably going to change as we move forward, but we will certainly make the appropriate changes if any are needed. the police on both sides of Middletown and Portland are working well together with our agencies to make sure that on the emergency side of it that we're able to get those transport services and paramedics over as needed. So that's working well. Spring Street on the Middletown side, has moved along very well. It's completed with new curbing. That intersection has changed there, and paving's been completed, so hopefully that will help with traffic as that begins to pick up, hopefully as we move into June. And additional work related to St. John's Square is planned to try to get ahead of some of the businesses possibly opening early as well in the Middletown area. But as we know, it's a 2-year project here, and there's going to be an awful lot of work, and we'll have to just see those changes as we move forward. More traffic barriers will be put into place to help now that we've seen how traffic is working and people are getting used to it, so they're making some changes with that, along with some of our area here in Spring Street, trying to re-identify it properly because of the one-way is not, being obeyed totally, but we're going to get there. It's just going to take some time, which is going to help our traffic. So we made some changes and agreed to do some of that today by adding some signs, and some, unfortunately, of our signs had been removed, so we want to make sure that those get replaced. Other than that, we're in pretty good shape. On the EMS side, we're trying to get back to we have to get back to somewhat of some activity in our firehouses related to really important equipment, inspections related to EMS equipment and trucks, and so we're doing that very limited, using precautions. It's usually one person in the firehouse at a time, so it seems to be working. Our PPE is starting to get better. I've worked close with Russ, and he has been a big help getting us supplies that he may have that we don't, or we're not able to get from the state. We do make our trips every week to pick up some of the national stock that's coming to Connecticut. That's going to help us. So right now we're looking good. There is a big shortage on gowns with everyone, but of course those need to go to our healthcare providers and our transport services, who are spending more times with the patients in confined areas. So we understand that. So we're working around that. But other than that, that's a brief synopsis of what's happening. People need to be aware that our guys in highway are going to be out working. They have been through this pandemic and, practicing their social distancing and working as much as they can without being in a tight group. So we're going to expand, and they've really come a long way learning how to do this, and they're making some progress. So I just caution that our public is aware that they're out there and are careful going through maybe work zones that might be much more spread out, so that we can spread our personnel out when they're working. So those zones that might have been smaller and easier to get around might be a little bigger for the time this summer. So just a caution to our travelers throughout the town that, pay attention to your road closers, slow down, pay attention to those guys that are working out in the field, and just be careful. We certainly don't want any accidents.
Great, Bob. Thank you. That's awesome. And, things are running smoothly, and hopefully with the reduced traffic flow and so forth, the contractor on the bridge is really moving ahead very, very rapidly. So hopefully that's good,
Yeah, it is. And they're making, there's changes every day related to design and some additional improvements that are going to need to be made as they find some things with the structure that, might not have been exposed prior to removing the deck. But, those are all minor, and they're working each and every day to make changes and make sure that if there's more repairs that are needed to be done, they are, and they're going to be scheduled within the time frame. So much more work to be done on the Middletown side as far as some replanning and some design work, but that's all in process. So it was a good, productive meeting today, and I think everybody's happy on all ends, including the state.
Great, Bob. Thanks for the input. I appreciate it. And thanks for coming on.
Okay.
Without any further ado, would like to welcome again for the first time on the podcast, we have Miss Betsy Gara, who is the Executive Director for COST, which is the Council of Small Towns. And her other hat is the Executive Director of CWWA, which is the Connecticut Waterworks Association. So, Betsy, if you just want to cover the COST hat first, I know on previous podcasts, concerning water, we had Lori Matthew on, as well as John Larson, and last week was Senator Norm Needleman. So what's new on the cost front?
Well, there's a lot that's new. Every day there's a new issue that we're dealing with, working with the governor's office and state agency partners to try to address. In the beginning of the pandemic, when the prohibitions on gatherings first began, we were working with the governor's office to try to address the municipal budget adoption process, because in Connecticut, many local budgets are adopted at town meeting or at referendum, and no guidance as to how to hold those safely without risking the health of residents and town officials. And so since then, we've been working on a myriad of issues with the governor's office via executive order, guidance documents, etc. I think we're up to about 45 executive orders, many of which deal with various municipal processes. At this point, today's discussion involves the board or commission members that are either appointed or elected at town meetings or referendums that are held in May. And there is some concern that, how do we address this? Do we extend those terms of office and leave the sitting members in until we can hold those elections and town meetings safely? Or is it just that we try to figure out how to hold these town meetings now without risking the public health? And so we're trying to reach out to our members, get information as to how many of them have board or commission or other appointments or elections that typically occur in May, and how we can help them address that. There's also a lot of other issues. So towns, and I have to say, folks like Susan Bransfield, as first selectman of Portland, and others, our first selectmen and mayors are really carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. I mean, they're just dealing with so many issues on behalf of their residents and businesses. I don't know how they do it. So my hat's off to them. They're also now dealing with how can they help their high school students celebrate graduations? How can they support efforts to reopen local businesses? Recently, the executive order issued by Governor Ned Lamont has expanded opportunities for outdoor dining. And that is something that I know the restaurants and other cafes and establishments are looking forward to, because they need to begin getting some customers in so they can continue to pay their staff and operate their businesses. So that will be happening on May 20th, and their businesses aren't required to open, but they are required to, if they do open, to adhere to various rules that the State Department of Economic and Community Development has provided, which are very well put together guidance documents to ensure that they're maintaining social distancing requirements, that they're wearing masks and other protective equipment, and so that we can do this in as safe a way as possible. So there's actually a lot happening, and I feel like we're on Zoom calls and conference calls and webinars pretty much every day.
Right. I think that's been kind of the way that most towns have been conducting business. I know we've been doing with Susan and the Board of Selectmen, and a lot of the commission meetings, as well as the Board of Education's. We have our Portland Senior Center / Waverly Center set up as our Zoom Central. As far as that goes, and that's been getting a tremendous amount of use. And I think going forward, it's going to be considered part of a way of doing business. I don't know what your sense is, but it's keeping people socially distanced, but it's also getting people together. We're finding that from our selectmen's meetings and Board of Ed meetings, we're getting a lot of public people that are signing on that probably would normally not come out to a meeting. So I guess there's good in that.
That's exactly right, Dave. And I think that is the good news from all of this. It's unfortunate that the towns can't hold their town meetings now. This is typically when they would have an annual meeting and adopt their local budget and take other actions necessary to the town. And town meetings are really the truest form of democracy. I mean, they're depicted in a painting by Norman Rockwell. They're a very charming feature of New England government, and it's very sad that the towns aren't able to hold those now. But I do think that the silver lining in all this is that more and more people are getting engaged via technology in the operation of their local government and really trying to provide input and obtain information on what is happening in their town. And I think that you're right, that the residents will come to rely on that. And so we will need to figure out some way, and you're probably in a great position to help us do this, Dave, figure out some way to hold our town halls and also allow people to participate remotely from their home. And I think that will be something that we need to figure out going forward.
No, absolutely. I think, from a standpoint of parents, babysitting becomes an issue that people would, have kids at home that they would love to attend a meeting, but unfortunately can't. But now through the vehicle of Zoom, I think that enables a lot more participation and, a lot more, transparency. I know Susan's done a great job facilitating, our budget hearings. And, Susan, you've been, racking your brain every week on, getting the people engaged. I think you've done a phenomenal job.
Thank you. And we, Betsy, we are going to have a couple of meetings, actually 3 more meetings this month of May. On the 19th, the 20th, the selectmen will meet and deliberate. And then on the 27th, they will consider an formal adoption of the budget. And it's a little unusual. It's trying to figure out the new plan and how we will accomplish the business that needs to be accomplished. I want to talk maybe just a little bit about the role that Council of Small Towns has played in really making the adjustments that are so necessary in our small towns. And maybe, Betsy, you could talk a little bit about the information and how you've shared it with the governor's office. I think our listeners would be interested in learning about how these decisions have been made.
Thanks, Susan. The governor's office has been very good about including cost and CCM and the councils of government in discussions about how to address some of these issues. And we appreciate that because they've been very difficult to try to figure out how we can move forward with adopting budgets in a way that would ensure the safety of the public, but also ensure that the towns could adopt a budget without disruption. Because one of the things we're talking about now is how to position towns for economic recovery. And if there's a budget in place, if they've been able to set a mill rate, it allows them to then move forward and begin to address some of those issues. There are a lot of unknowns, and we're not really sure at this point what kinds of costs towns are going to be faced with as a result of the pandemic. We also don't know how it's going to impact property tax collections. So one of the earlier executive orders required towns to either defer property taxes for 90 days or to provide a low interest rate to property owners that had delinquent taxes. And recognizing that we need to assist our residents and business during this time, I think most of the towns were very happy to do that. But at the same time, they're nervous about what that's going to mean in terms of their municipal finances. So one of the things that COS has been doing is identifying ways that we can assist towns by providing their funding, the municipal aid funding that has been long overdue. We've worked very hard to make sure that the Bond Commission approved the town aid road funding and other funding that was made available to towns so they could move forward with those construction projects. In addition, the local capital improvement program funding was made available, and that will allow towns to move ahead with various building construction projects. And that's important because those create jobs,
Right.
And those will end up bringing money into our communities and ensuring that we have the infrastructure in place that's necessary to continue to support and attract our local business community.
Right. Good point.
So what we've been trying to do is be the conduit between our members, which are the small towns. We have approximately 115 small towns that are members of COS, and find out what are the issues that they're dealing with. How can we assist them in addressing these things either via executive order or by some kind of relaxation of a regulation or rule. And the members have been great about providing us with that input. It's absolutely critical that we have that, because I don't think anybody really understood all of the different issues that towns are dealing with on a daily basis until town halls largely had to close during the pandemic, and people were wondering, well, how do we get our building permits? How do we ensure that we get our dogs licensed and our rabies vaccine information updated and all of the things that the local health directors do? And so I think people will have a greater appreciation for those activities, for their town halls after this pandemic is over. But really what we are is just providing the resources to our towns, letting them know what we're doing. And if they have any issues that they need to address, if whatever it is, whether it's a school-related issue, enforcement issue, we're there to reach out to the administration and the state agencies to try to address that.
Yeah, and you've done a great job. I mean, there's been a lot of instances where we were wondering in our towns, is this going to work? How are we going to be able to be certain that, as you said, the dog licenses are collected, or whether the primary that's going to be held on August 11, how is that going to work? And by extension, there's concerns about how the presidential election and the other folks that are going to be elected in November will occur. And that constant communication among the towns and the state is so critical. And to have a professional organization like COST and CCM be able to be that conduit is critically important. You know, we have a lot of concerns about the voting process, Betsy, and that's something I'm working with our town clerk and our registrars on. And it's something that our listeners are going to have to pay close attention to in terms of participation in that August 11th primary. And then, as I said, in November for our general election. These elections are critical to the democratic process, and we make certain that people will be able to vote and have their say in those elections.
Oh, definitely.
Yes, I agree.
Definitely. That's great, Betsy. I appreciate it. Okay, putting on your other hat now. You and I work together quite closely on the waterfront. So tell us what's happening on the CWWA front.
Well, water companies, whether they're municipal, regional, or private water companies, are considered essential services. And, of course, we understand that. We're very fortunate in Connecticut that our water companies have really stepped up to ensure that there hasn't been any disruption in providing drinking water to residents and businesses, and they are taking measures to ensure the safety of their employees. It has been a struggle, though, because they've had to really change the way that they operate. A lot of them, for example, will have their certified operators on separate shifts so that if one of them becomes ill, they don't end up transmitting it to the other operator, because those people are absolutely critical to the operation of the system. And so there's other things that they are looking at. We were working with them to see how we can help them address certain issues that they're facing. So, for example, water companies are required to do periodic meter testing, which involves going into the premises of a customer, and we're concerned that that would put the employee at risk of getting the coronavirus. And how can we suspend that requirement at this time? Is it mission critical that this testing be conducted? Other things that we're looking at are the watershed inspections. Towns, municipal water companies, and other water companies are required to perform watershed inspections and also cross-connection inspections and testing. And again, these things put them in contact with customers, and we want to make sure that we're not going to put them in harm's way by doing these kinds of inspections. And can we at least waive the inspections at this point in time? But I think one of the most important things to remember, when we first had the restrictions as a result of the pandemic, people were rushing out and buying different products. because they were concerned about that there would be a shortage. Well, the good thing is that everybody agrees that the water is safe during this time and that you don't need to go purchase bottled water. You can rely on the water from your tap. It's clean, it's safe, and we're fortunate in Connecticut to have some of the highest quality water in the world. So that's been good news. I think what we're going to have to struggle with is that because of all the building closures, restaurant closures, that the revenues have been down. And unfortunately, the costs of maintaining the distribution system and the treatment operations doesn't change. That's probably gone up a bit in terms of the pandemic. But so we're going to have to figure out how that's going to impact customer rates going forward.
No, definitely. And then when Laurie was on, one of the health department's concerns is that these water or seasonal water systems that have been shut down, or even regular water systems that perhaps have been hibernated, whatever, or when they're brought back up online, that everything is done procedurally correct, and again ensuring that water quality as far as that goes.
Well, that's a good point. We actually included the Department of Public Health guidance document in our bulletin to both towns and to the water companies, because you have to realize that if your building's been closed for a long period of time, that there are certain things you need to do to make sure that you address any stagnant water issues, which could compromise public health. So that information is available at the State Department of Public Health's website. We've also posted it on the CWWA website at CWWA.org and at ctcost.org, COST website.
Great. Well, thanks, Betsy. And I think the annual conference has been postponed, correct?
Yes, that's one of the things that is very troubling. People join associations in large part because of the association. You get to meet people, share information with your colleagues, gain expertise on various issues through these association meetings. And so every May, the Connecticut Waterworks Association and our sister organization, the Connecticut section of the American Waterworks Association, would hold a meeting to provide updates on various issues and to also give people the chance to just get to know each other as an industry. It's a very collegial industry, and I think people rely on some of the tips that they get from just talking to their colleagues about some of the issues that they're facing. And unfortunately, we're not able to do that this year. However, we are discussing holding a virtual annual meeting. I've invited folks from the State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to present on that, and that is something that we can hold via Zoom. It's not the same thing, but I think it will be helpful to give members the opportunity to discuss in real time some of the challenges that they're facing due to the pandemic, and to share strategies and best practices going forward.
Sure, and not to mention, it allows the operators in the water systems to keep up their continuing education units. So that's so important to to keeping their licenses and so forth. So that's it's an integral part. I know. For my other hat in the music industry, our summer trade show and meeting was also canceled. So it does. You're right. It absolutely does affect. There's definitely a trickle down effect. So okay, Betsy, thanks so much. I don't know, Susan, you have any?
No, good to hear from you, Betsy, and thank you. Please continue your work. We appreciate it and we need it, especially as our businesses and our retail, food, all the different businesses are coming back into being open in whatever capacity is appropriate. So we appreciate all the work you're doing. It really means a lot here in our town of Portland. So thank you, Betsy.
Great.
Oh, you're very welcome, Susan, and thanks for all that you folks do. It's been really eye-opening to see everything that our first selectmen and mayors do on behalf of their residents. So it's very much appreciated.
Great, Betsy. Thank you. Also, if the section or CWWA would like to consider working on something and doing a podcast, please reach out, because we have the studio here, and we're finding that it's a great way to get information out to the public. And it's unbelievable the amount of listens that we're getting. We're getting anywhere between 400 and 1,100 listens per episode. So
wow.
that's a great vehicle to get things out. So again, thanks, Betsy, for coming on. And without any further ado, I think, Russ, we're going to bring you in out of the bullpen here. So Mr. Russell Melmed, who is actually the Chatham Health Director, and I know Betsy mentioned the situation with small towns and graduations, and I know Russ and I attended a meeting earlier this morning concerning our graduation. So, Russ, I'm going to turn it over to you and what's happening in the Chatham Health District.
Sure. Happy to come in and clean up and to be in the studio for the first time. I can hear everybody so much clearer than when I'm on the phone. I assume Betsy had some struggles as I've had hearing people on the phone, but really appreciate hearing from Betsy. In particular, I want to touch on something that you said, Betsy, and that was that you're acting as something of a conduit for information to our small towns and our businesses. And in a time when information is so important and the volume of information out there is so large, it's important to have agencies like yours do that for our citizens and our businesses. And so I appreciate everything you're doing. As I've been doing each episode, I'll just touch on some numbers here. In Portland, we have had 53 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 11 fatalities. So since last week, we've really held steady, and that is really good. We are seeing that for the most part across our towns in Chatham Health District. And since the end of April, so for the last 2 weeks, we have seen a noticeable decline from our peak in new cases. We are still seeing new cases. 1, 2, sometimes 3 every day. But we were at 4, 5, or 6 every day. So we really are down now, it's safe to say, off the peak. And so everything people have been doing has been working. And so I just want to remind everybody to continue doing all the things you've been doing. We have not vanquished the virus. It's not gone. It's still there. And what we've been doing has been working. So we need to continue to do all those things like wear masks, stay 6 feet away, stay home from work. Don't go out if we're sick, in particular if anybody in our household has been sick. Sure. Stay home. This virus can be transmitted before you start with symptoms. So we just don't know if just because we're not coughing and have a fever that we may not be exposing others. It's really important. That's why the masks are so important.
Right.
You just don't know when you're becoming infectious. And we spread this virus from our mouths and noses when we cough or sneeze. So if we're wearing a mask, and also, not for nothing, when we talk or scream or sing, anytime we're using our mouths and they're open and we're expressing our respiratory secretions, it's getting out into the environment. So mask wearing is really important. I want to spend most of my time today talking about reopening, sort of writ large, and I'll get into some details. But the governor's phase 1 plan seems to be moving forward. We are seeing reduced hospitalizations, fewer cases, so that's all good news. We're working with a lot of businesses right now on how they can implement the guidance that the state has put forth to open safely. And these are all very new to many businesses. And businesses have been operating for the same way for many years, and operating a different way while keeping everybody separate and having all these policies is a big, big challenge. So I want to, for our listeners out there, to preach patience. We're not getting back to normal. We are moving towards some new normal. And if you decide that you want to go out to eat to a restaurant that's opened up for outdoor seating, and you're not wearing a mask and they ask you to kindly wear one or go home, be patient with them. It's for their protection, and they're wearing a mask for your protection. They're seating you apart from others and asking that you not visit another table, even if you see a friend or a neighbor that you haven't seen in 2 months sitting at the next table. We're asking, and they're going to be asking you not to get up and go visit with them, because that's how this virus spreads, is going around to different people. The more contacts you have with others, if you're sick and infectious, the more we're going to spread the virus. So please be patient with our business owners as they start to operate. Our salons, our restaurants are going to have a really big challenge ahead of them if they want to start operating. And for restaurants, for outdoor dining, I'm hearing a lot of people asking questions about what's the difference between being 6 feet apart inside and being 6 feet apart outside. It may seem random to you, but there is science behind why we are starting with outdoor seating and not indoor seating. And it has to do with dilution. And there's an old adage in environmental health and public health that goes like this: the solution to pollution is dilution. Usually we're talking about wastewater and things like that, but we can also talk about virus. And when you deal with a respiratory virus, something that gets in the air, and that's how it's typically transmitted, the more air you have in between you and the next person, the more dilute that virus is going to be. And you may not expose somebody to an infectious dose of the virus. Yes, in theory, one viable viral particle can get in your nose and you could be infected, but typically it takes more than that. There is an infectious dose for viruses. We're not sure what that is for this particular virus yet, but there is one. And so when you deal with air and airflow, when you're outside, there's more air. There's more airflow. It's circulating all around you and diluting that virus if it's coming out of your mouth or the person that you're sitting with or the person sitting at the next table. So it is safer by nature when you're outside with more air, even given the same space between you and somebody else, compared to when you're inside. There is less air movement inside. Typically, when you go into a restaurant, especially a small restaurant, there will be a ventilation system. The air comes in one way and it goes out another, and it creates usually a linear flow across a room. Air comes in and it goes out on the other end of the room. And if you are sick and you're at one end of the room and you are expressing viral particles into the air, that air handling system is going to move the virus very neatly across the room to everybody else in that room. And so there's less air. The air is moving in one particular direction, usually inside. And so there is a greater risk to have more exposures to an infectious dose of the virus when you're inside compared to outside. So that's why we're starting with outdoor dining. It is safer. We don't want walls blocking the airflow. We don't want the air to be sitting around one table and creating, if you can picture it, a cloud of contagion descending on everybody in that room. But there have been study after study about how respiratory infections spread in small enclosed spaces. And you can literally follow the directionality of the airflow and see how many people got sick downwind and how many didn't get sick upwind. So I just wanted to put that out for everybody so that they understand why we're not bringing people indoors and why we're asking people not to crowd around bars and things like that. This is all a little bit of an experiment. I know people want certainty and clarity and to know everything is either perfectly safe or perfectly unsafe. And we're not in that place right now. We're in the place where we are dealing with mitigation. That doesn't mean we're going to get to zero. It's not elimination of risk. We're never going to get to elimination of risk because we are social creatures. We have families. We do have to go to work. So we're always going to be around people. So we're dealing with mitigating risk, reducing risk, not eliminating risk. I can't guarantee you that it's going to be zero risk when you go outside and eat outdoor dining. Again, it's not zero risk, but the risk will be low if everybody follows those precautions. Because the risk isn't going to be zero, that's why we're also encouraging people who are at high risk for severe consequences of a disease. Those are people, older adults, people over 65, people who have underlying immune system issues or chronic diseases, to really refrain from going out into those public spaces right now. You are still at high risk for severe disease, so your exposure is not going to be the same as somebody else's. Your outcome will not be the same as somebody else's. So they're different, I'd say, stratifications of risk for people in our communities. So still be careful. And I give everybody out there who's listening permission that when you are in a public setting and you see somebody not following the rules, if you're not comfortable, remove yourself from that situation. It's about being comfortable with your own protection, your own safety, understanding how you feel in a given scenario. We are getting calls from members of the public regularly saying, I was in XYZ store and I saw somebody not wearing a mask, and please investigate. Or I was somewhere, I went to a grocery store and they weren't taking people's temperatures. And I thought that people were supposed to do those things. There is now a very clear way that complaints about violations of these Department of Economic and Community Development and governor's rules go, and it is to the 211 system. When you go to restaurants or you go to hair salons or things like that now, they will have signs up that direct you to call 211 with those complaints. But we will never be in a place where every complaint can be investigated thoroughly. It's just not feasible for the health department or the police department to be the mask police, to go out and do patrols. And when somebody says, I saw somebody without a mask, to drop down from a helicopter from ropes with their SWAT gear and shut down the establishment. It just isn't feasible. So I want everybody to understand that while we are opening up and while we are having all these rules, to manage your expectations. And that's why I'm emphasizing some personal responsibility. Every one of us has to take personal responsibility for following the rules. And also, if you see something that makes you feel uncomfortable, to just remove yourself from that situation.
Sure.
Don't think that it's just going to be fine everywhere, because it's not going to be.
Absolutely. I know, Russ, being that just the time of the year it is, obviously, schools are not going back, for the rest of the year. And I know graduations are looming in all of the towns. So I know you and I were in a meeting this morning. So, just kind of allude what people should expect. And because a lot of people are upset because they can't have a in-person graduation, and, just expound on that a little bit.
Sure. So you can imagine a normal graduation ceremony. 100, 200 students all sitting shoulder to shoulder in chairs, family members surrounding them, lots of handshaking and hugs and speeches and things of that nature. I would be shocked if I saw anything like that this year. I am not recommending that anybody have anything like a normal graduation ceremony. What we can perhaps expect is virtual graduation ceremonies where you're not in person at all. I am in discussions with some of our municipalities, Portland included, about different other social distancing type of options for graduation ceremonies that may include people staying in their cars. And perhaps coming up to a stage in small groups of 5, where the families get out of the car, they stand at the bottom of the stage, the 5 students come up, staying 6 feet apart, they walk up to the stage, they pick up their diploma off a table, there is no handshaking and no hugging, you get your picture, you get to see, you walk across the stage. There are going to be a range of graduation ceremonies, but there will not be anything like a large mass of people standing on a field or in a gymnasium, shaking hands, hugging, and the like. It's just not going to happen this year. So I think we'll probably see the last thing to sort of come back when this pandemic really starts to abate, because we've got a vaccine hopefully, is those large public gatherings. We're already hearing about a lot of fairs and festivals, the things that people love to do in the summer. Sail Fest in New London brings 100,000 people a day. That was canceled. We're just not going to see those things. So graduation is one of those things. It's a large social gathering. And anytime you have a bunch of people in a space together, even if you're staying 6 feet apart, like I said, that mitigates the risk. It does not bring the risk to zero.
Sure.
So when you have many, many people in one space together and you have 1 or 2 people sick, you just increase the likelihood that you're going to get transmission. And when you increase the likelihood of transmission in those settings, you increase the likelihood of transmission to a lot of people.
Sure. Absolutely.
So we're really going to not see those kinds of normal graduations. I'm sorry to disappoint everybody out there who's listening. I really feel for the class of 2020. This is a very, very difficult time for many of those folks, especially the ones who've been working just so hard to do so well. And maybe there are valedictorians out there who are really looking forward to giving speeches and things like that. And maybe it's going to have to be virtual. So
Sure. Yeah. And I think, too, the parents have to understand, too. I know they feel for the kids. And like I say, it's the class of 2020, unfortunately, has really come up short in a lot of areas, so understandably. So I'm glad you touched upon that. Thanks,
Yeah,
Russ.
and just one more thing, and I don't want to. I'll just be careful with what I say here, but whenever you get 50 young people together, high school students who've been cooped up in their homes for a better part of 2 months, haven't seen their friends, even if you give them all the best instructions of how to stay 6 feet apart, it doesn't take too many, and it doesn't take a vivid imagination to picture a few of those folks perhaps not following all the rules. High school pranks, right? There's a nice long tradition of pranks. I would hate to see our high school students decide the best prank would be for 50 of them to jump up, get on the stage, and get a selfie together. You know, the biggest pandemic prank ever. But, you know, what that might result in is illness and perhaps the worst outcome is which somebody dies. So it's really hard to have everybody follow the rules when you have a lot of people together. It just is really difficult.
Well, as you said, we're social creatures. It's
Yes.
something we learn from early days, preschool days, that we're supposed to be interaction and be kind to one another and hug one another and be part of a community. And this is just so foreign to us in terms of our training, particularly in our schools and in the whole atmosphere of working as a team. I mean, that's something that we're taught from the time we're very young.
Yeah.
And but I do know that people are concerned about their loved ones, and we've all been touched by the unfortunate deaths that have occurred, as well as the very difficult times that people are having right now, both economically as well as health-wise. So there is a deeper understanding that we all have of what it is you as our health professional are telling us to do. There are some other celebrations I'll just point out to the listeners that will be happening, and I don't know all of them because they're still in planning stages, but for our Memorial Day celebration, we will be announcing some of the celebration and the honors and the tributes to our fallen heroes that we'll be talking about. One of the things that our high school students are going to do through Miss Kristen Novak is there going to be some songs and some singing that will be available for all of us to listen to and to honor our soldiers and those that have died. So we look forward to that. There's also going to be, in terms of our graduations, quote unquote, many of our college students, bachelor's, master's, PhDs, doctorates, those folks have accomplished a tremendous amount, and yet they're not having celebration. So just a very token of our appreciation and honor to them. We're going to put up a couple of signs in front of the town hall and in front of the police department on Main Street honoring our college graduates. And then I know that within our high school, each student is going to have a lawn sign with their name and a celebration and a thumbs up and a congratulations to them. Those are going to be located near our Brownstone Intermediate School on Main Street for a period of time. And I understand then they'll be in each of the students' lawns throughout the town. So there are ways that we want to exemplify and certainly personify the honor that our students have achieved, and not for the common way of doing it. We'll be doing it in another way. And that's something that I hope the listeners stay tuned for and remember to congratulate people in their own way. So
Great, thanks, Susan.
I think that's great.
Yeah, I think that is. So anyway, guys, thank you so much. I think that's bringing our episode number 8, okay, to a close. And again, Betsy, thank you so much for coming on and giving us updates for both CWWA and cost. And please,
Very welcome.
Please stay safe and stay home and enjoy yourself. And again, I appreciate your participation. And again, Mr. Russ Melmed, who is a frequent flyer here on the weekly podcast for the town of Portland. Thanks again, Russ, for all your valuable and vital information, as well as our Commander-in-Chief here, Miss Susan Bransfield. So on behalf of us all here, we're broadcasting or recording live here at the Town Tech Educational Partnership Studio at Portland High School. And again, this is going to be aired on the Comcast channel. And again, Betsy, you sent us a good picture, so we're going to put that up there and so forth, and so that everybody knows who's talking, when they're talking, and so forth. So again, from all of us here at the studio, I'm your host, Dave Kuzminski, and please stay home, Stay safe and wash your hands.
Just wash your hands. Don't touch your eyes, your nose, your mouth. Social distance, avoid the crowds. Fight against the corona. Practice good hygiene and keep your personal space clean. Respect the social distancing. Fight against the corona. No matter Asian, black or white, the corona is colorblind. Together we can win the fight. Fight against the corona. Stay ready today, and tomorrow will be okay. Together we can win the fight. Fight against the corona.